Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, September 17th. Derek and Ripert, Saris, Britt here with you on this episode. We discuss AL and NL Rookie of the Year awards and how they should be different in the future. I have a proposal that I'd like to run by Eno and Britt that I think would be a win-win for all parties involved. We'll see if that idea actually could get some legs. We had a story from Andrew Baggerly of The Athletic earlier this week about the unusual path to Matt Chapman's extension with the Giants and what that might mean for Farhan Zaidi's future in San Francisco. And time permitting, we're going to take a look at the Orioles. They haven't been the same Orioles throughout the second half of this season. We'll try to dig into why that has been the case. But with a heavy rundown, we're going to get right at it. I'm going to make this very simple. I think the AL and the NL Rookie of the Year awards need to be split. I think we need to have a hitter award and a pitcher award in each league for each rookie class. I think you could also make an argument to even split the pitcher one against starters and relievers. So you could have 6 Rookie of the Year awards. I think there are some people at home punching air
nobody
right now.
Needs a
everybody
rookie
gets
reliever. Yeah, nobody needs a rookie reliever award. Come on.
That's my B proposal. My A proposal is just to split it, hitter and pitcher. But I think you could justify a reliever one. We'll push that aside for now. Simple first question, Britt. Have I lost my mind, or is it actually a good idea considering the differences between the way hitters and pitchers are developed? We ask them to do different things. The timeline for pitchers is often different, right? So we have guys that come up early in the season. We have guys like Paul Skeens where they're trying to massage the workload to make sure he gets everything that he needs all year, with most of those innings backloaded in Pittsburgh. We have some guys that have no restrictions at all. So you're already making kind of a difficult comparison within the group of pitchers, but then to compare them to position players seems like it's an extremely difficult task for a voter.
Yeah, and this is why we have Cy Young and MVP, right? Mm-hmm. And spare me the whole pitchers end up on MVP ballots. They do at times. They never win. They somehow will be, you get to pick 10 for MVP, unlike these other awards where it's usually top 3 on the BBWAA ballots. So because pitchers have their own separate award, even if a pitcher has a case, they don't win MVP, because it is very hard to differentiate pitching and hitting. So I'm with you on this. You lost me on the rookie reliever of the year award. I agree with that's that I think probably gets thrown out the window, because it's just, we don't even have a rookie. We don't even have a reliever award for big league relievers. Emmanuel Clase, how do you define that season? Remember when Zach Britton had the American League record for consecutive saves, and he didn't win the MVP or the Cy Young? He didn't, I think come close. I'd have to go back and look at it, but
like Rolaids Relief Award.
Yeah. I think you could make the case for having some kind of relief award. The problem is these other awards have been on for so long that they are etched into history, right? The league originally started these awards. The BBWAA took them over and kind of made them into this thing that they are, which is very prestigious and really seen as the league's biggest awards. So when you're now adding awards, it is hard for them, I think, to immediately gain legitimacy for guys. Are they going to immediately be written into contracts for rookies? Hey, if you win this, you get this bonus, which is kind of how it's set up now.
Does anybody remember who won the Hank Aaron Award last year?
Right, which is
supposedly the best hitter, but it's a new one. It doesn't have the same.
Yeah, they just take a while to really kind of, I think, build that. So, would Paul Skeens, if we said, hey, Paul, we know that you maybe could win Rookie of the Year, but instead we're going to split it, and you're going to win this made-up award, the DVR award, and the real Rookie of the Year is going to go to Jackson Merrill. The repercussions wallet-wise, the repercussions just while we kind of catch up, I think, would be the biggest obstacle. It makes a lot of sense, but there are hurdles, I think, in creating that kind of award and then splitting that kind of award. Although I, in fairness, agree with you. I do vote the BBWAA. I don't have Rookie of the Year, so I'm comfortable saying that I would vote for Jackson Merrill, because I think he is more important to his team than Paul Skeens, but it is just so subjective. It is based on a million different things, and it is really hard to say Jackson Merrill is better than Paul Skeens. They're totally different players.
Yeah. The whole idea of wins above replacement is to better compare totally different players, put everything on the same framework. So that's the idea of it. But I do agree that, especially with pitching, we just there's a lot less agreement when it comes from site to site on wins above replacement with pitching. And so I think we're not really nailing that one down with as much precision maybe as hitting. And so I agree with you on that. And then there's like our own personal biases, which may be correct or not. I just say that like we have as beat writers or as people who are in the clubhouse, I think we have a little bit of a, bias towards the everyday player. I mean, it's because the clubhouse, like the clubhouse looks for leadership from the everyday players. There's something about going every day. Now you can say a pitcher affects as many plate appearances as a batter over the course of a season, because the pitcher every 5 days, a starting pitcher, they will affect 700 plate appearances, and a batter to the plate 700 times, except the way it happens is different, right? Because the pitcher does it every 5 days. So he can make outside importance every 5 days. Whereas the everyday player could be of outsized importance any day. So there's a little bit of a difference to that. And something about posting every day and being there every day. Jackson Merrill's been the center fielder every day. Skeens hasn't even been up all year. So I lean that way. I thought it would be instructive just to like show you how different all of the sites are on these players. So these are Baseball Reference, Baseball Prospectus, and FanGraphs WAR for each of them. Skeens and Merrill tied on a composite if you average them, and that's despite Baseball Reference saying, "Oh no, it's Skeens," because it's almost 2 wins difference. Whereas FanGraphs says, "No, it's Jackson Merrill. It's almost a full win difference there." But if you average them all up, they're exactly the same value. It's a little bit easier for me to compare Jackson Merrill and Jackson Chourio because they have almost exactly the same OPS, right? Merrill's is just a little bit better, and Merrill plays center field. Like that's an easy easy comparison for me. But Merrill versus Skeens is still a tough one. In the AL Rookie of the Year award, you have the Austin Wells, who's generally highly regarded by everybody. Baseball Reference has a little bit less value in framing, I think, so that's why he's behind there. And then Colton Cowser is a little bit more valued by FanGraphs than other sites, maybe because of his time in center field, his defense. And then Willie Abreu is right there in the middle. I would call that basically a 3-way tie for the AL Rookie of the Year right now. And I think that's a really tough one to decide.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack here. I mean, one of the key differences just off the cuff between the FanGraphs and Baseball Reference wars, Baseball Reference's WAR formula gives more weight to pitchers. The number on Paul Skeens is radically different, right? Paul Skeens is the 3rd most valuable pitcher in the NL by Baseball Reference WAR. He's behind, I think, only Chris Sale and Hunter Green this year.
He's in the Cy Young race.
He's in the Cy Young race if you use that reference.
Yeah.
And then the other weird thing is like I spend so much more time looking at the WAR leaderboards on FanGraphs because it's just there when I'm on that site more. I spend less time looking at the Baseball Reference ones because I see it more on the individual player pages. I thought the gap between Jackson Merrill and Jackson Chourio by WAR was big because of FanGraphs, but they're equal on Baseball Reference. But then there's the Skeens question if you're not splitting hitters from pitchers. So I just find this entire thing to be very stressful. I don't have to vote. I'm never going to get a vote for the BBWAA. I'm not even going to apply to ever be a part of it again, I don't think. So it has nothing to do with me. But I look at this and I think, okay, if Merrill versus Chourio is a straight up toss up on one site, and then we're comparing apples to oranges with the Skeens Merrill, Skeens Chourio comparisons doing that, what do you land on? We had a question in our Discord that inspired a lot of this conversation from Big Prince and you Darvish fan. I would die for you. Why you? Not YOU. And one of the questions that we were asked was, how do we think the voters will handle this situation, given that there's a very popular rising star in Skeens, who's like a star kind of outside of baseball a little bit more, and then, considering that versus the Merrill Chourio types, like, is there going to be anyone that gravitates more towards Skeens for narrative? Are there some writers that are going to be more locked in on Baseball Reference instead of FanGraphs? Like, what do you think currently makes up the voting electorate for these awards? Like, what pops when things are generally equal or as muddy as they are by the metrics right now?
Yeah, if people are just straight looking at WAR to make these decisions, I really hope that's not the case, because I think WAR is good for some stuff, but it's not. We shouldn't just be voting based off of this one statistic that, as we mentioned, is a subjective statistic. There's all different formulas. It's not like we're arguing over home runs or something that like has a definitive answer. So I think based on the BBWAA composite, there is a wide range of people voting. And some people are just going to look at the WAR or look at, who they think is better without looking at stats, which is another kind of dangerous way to do it. I think you have to take into account everything. It does seem like in the past, BBWAA voters have skewed toward teams that are good, especially for the big awards, that like the MVP and the Cy Young. And, sometimes you get an edge if, let's say, Francisco Lindor returns and leads the Mets to a playoff berth, right? That in some voters' mind is a little bit of an edge. Does it count for more that Jackson Merrill has hit a lot of these quote unquote clutch home runs, right? And that the Padres are in a real serious push, not just playoffs, but to potentially overtake the Dodgers in the NL West. Does that matter? I think that does, versus Skeens, who essentially is on a Pirates team pitching for nothing, right? So I think you have to take into account all these factors, and every person is going to take into account their own biases, right? Does the people who see Skeens more, are they going to vote Skeens? Are people in the West who see Jackson Merrill all the time, are they going to feel like, well, it's got to be Jackson Merrill for all of these reasons? There is so many different biases that come into these awards that are, like I said, are already subjective. I just hope, and Rustin Todd did a great job yesterday for The Athletic talking about WAR, is in that story. I encourage you to check it out, and how, it just varies. And we cannot now just be looking at one number to evaluate all these guys. It is a helpful tool in assessing, but in my mind, it is still one part of a bigger picture when I'm looking at an awards race.
I mean, it's so difficult because it's supposed to be the all-encompassing stat. It's supposed to be, and it is cool because it's a framework that puts all their different things they do into one place. And so it is hard if you take that number, if you get away from that number, then you say, okay, that you're going to be double counting something, right? Because you're like, okay, I looked at WAR, and now I'm going to look at something else. Well, that's in WAR. Like, what are you going to look at? Oh, that's in WAR. Oh, you want to look at? No, that's in WAR. So it's like, most of the stuff is in there. I just had while you were talking, I've watched a lot of Padres games. They're out here, family, they're fans, and so I've watched a lot of Padres games. I had thought I was like, oh, Jackson Money Merrill, like, this is the guy who's clutch beyond belief. There is a stat for clutch on FanGraphs, and I just sorted it for rookies. And Jackson Chourio is more clutch this year than Jackson Merrill.
See, there's my bias.
I find that extra funny. Not for any other reason other than I think you do hear different narratives depending on the shows you watch or the games you happen to see.
And I think media markets has something to do with it.
Yeah, in this case, at least they're both small, but I do think the Padres get a little more national attention than the Brewers. That's been my assessment, being kind of caught in the middle, but they still get less attention than a lot of other big market teams.
But does that factor in,
versus Merrill, huh?
Does that clutch thing factor into the WAR?
No. I'm not actually sure that it does.
I don't think it does.
I don't
so some of
think
those intangibles I mentioned, like, is your team in the race? Those things are not tied.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you want to, like, the sort of value beyond the numbers of being there every day, like, sort of, if you want it, like, if you think it's really a tie between Merrill and Skeens on numbers and all that and value, but you're just like one guy posted every day, like, I think that's fair. I think that's how people act in clubhouses. I think that bias will push the vote to Merrill. I think when people are, that's why I kind of agree with you about the rookie pitcher idea, because I think when presented, if I presented to you a theoretical world in which these two players are exactly valuable, same value, one's an everyday player and one's a pitcher, you're going to take the everyday player.
I think that happens a lot. I think when you look back at the historical Rookie of the Year winners, you see mostly position players, a lot of relievers. Like, that's the weird recent trend. If it's a pitcher, it often ends up being a reliever instead of a starter,
because they can give you some number that just looks so beautiful.
Absurd ratios,
like a 0.9 ERA for the season, and you're just like
20 saves, 25 saves, right? They emerge, they take over that role. That makes a big deal. We put a lot of weight behind that. But even if you're trying to break ties with things like defense, you look at Chourio versus Merrill. Chourio doesn't play center field. Jackson Merrill does. Jackson Merrill is a -2 by defensive run saved.
That'd
right,
be enough
just
for
playing
me.
it. See, just playing it's enough for you. I'm curious though, if Chorio's a plus 12 playing the two corner spots, plus
On
12
a
by
great defensive
DRS
team
on a great defensive team,
that has
and
other
a
options.
plus 4 on outs above average, and Merrill's a plus 8 on outs above average, but a minus 2 on defensive run save. Like that doesn't give you a lot either. That's another one where it's like, okay, harder position, maybe a little disagreement in the numbers.
Center, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And on a team that didn't have other options to play center field, maybe Chorio would play. He didn't, so you can't play that game. But all of that stuff gets wrapped into this and lost. But I do think the initial double split down to relievers is one step too far. It's cutting the pie into too many little pieces. I do think hitter pitcher just should be separate.
Well,
they're asked to do very different things.
There's another aspect here that WAR sort of wants to capture, but I'm not sure it does capture it completely. And that is playing time. So the idea of WAR is that this is like, wins above replacement. So you sort of built in replacements. The idea is that even if you played a third of the 2/3 of the season, you could replace that player for the other third of the season and get the same number, right? That's sort of the idea. The problem is that we all know that players go through slumps and go and get better and get worse, and like will actually be below replacement for a while. Like will be so bad that they're actually taking numbers away from themselves. It just goes through the ups and downs. And so I think about that a little bit when I look at Austin Wells versus Colton Cowser, because we've seen Colton Cowser this year come out gangbusters and then disappear and then come back. You know what I mean? And we've seen Austin Wells come out sort of fizzly and then get hot. But we haven't seen Austin Wells get cold again. And, if you gave Austin Wells the missing plate appearances between him and Colton Cowser, it's possible that he would have that bad stretch and be below Cowser. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's the way that these things work is like, we don't know. And so if you don't know really what would have happened with those extra 150 plate appearances, you have to give some sort of edge to the guy who actually played more. And so that factors into this Merrill versus Skeens thing too. Skeens only pitched. Yeah. What if Skeens pitched 200 innings this year and got tired for the last 80? And we've already actually seen his velos going down, his strikeout rates going down, his stuff's going down. If you add to this 80 mythical innings on there, it might be with a 4 ERA. And then he wouldn't be in the discussion at all for rookie of the year, So
but that's been the discussion, hasn't it? In the recent years over Cy Young, guys are winning with fewer and fewer innings.
Yep.
Do you value the innings or do you value the stuff in the ERA? Right.
Right. And WAR as a framework is supposed to give you still ability to talk about it. But we all know that if you do play more, you can actually WAR is still a counting stat. So you can play more and actually remove WAR. Like that is totally a possibility. And the people who played all year have had times, where they looked bad. I mean, we just had Aaron Judge. What did he do? He was like homerless for 3 weeks or something. It was the longest homerless drought of his career.
Yeah. Yeah, the Paw Patrol jinx. Isn't that what people were calling it?
Yeah. Paw Patrol jinx. Never again will a major league player lend likeness to Paw Patrol. That will never, ever happen again. The other part of this rookie of the year conversation that kind of got tabled a little bit is just Skeens being so much more valuable by WAR than Shota Imanaga and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And I've for years had the kind of firm stance that players who are professionals in other leagues that come to the big leagues probably shouldn't win rookie of the year here because they're not actually rookies. They are new to Major League Baseball, but they're not college graduates of a year or two ago or high school kids from 3 or 4 years ago. It's not quite the same. I don't know what you would do with those players otherwise to try and
newcomer
lump them into the conversation.
We may try to make another award.
Yeah. We're watering this down now. International Player of the Year. We're watering this down.
No, I feel like the other benefit of this, and I hate doing marketing for a league that isn't paying me to do marketing for them, but I do think celebrating more of the young players is good. Like celebrating 4 instead of 2 is good, right? Just another way to get a little attention on some guys that may not have been as big a part of the national conversation all season as they should have been, right? That's a small bonus. You're helping create more stars by manufacturing a little more energy around the end of the year. But the Austin Wells Cowser thing, that's a great toss-up. I know when we last mentioned the AL Rookie of the Year race, there were some folks in Boston who were mad that we didn't talk about Ceddanne Rafaela. The main reason we didn't talk about him is because he was the inspiration for the conversation. It was a ridiculous Bill James tweet talking about how great Rafaela was that made me want to look at the rest of the class, and then I just missed the original guy. If you look at WAR, most of the WAR formulas are lower on Rafaela than the counting stats, but the simply like playing all season and having a role is borne out in the counting stats. He's got 15 homers, second among AL rookies. He's got 68 runs scored, also second among AL rookies. He leads AL rookies in RBIs with 70. He's second in stolen bases with 19. And I think for me, I'm like, well, he's definitely a good rotisserie player, like great in the 5 categories we care about, but he's got a 277 OBP. And even though he moves between shortstop and center field, he's very good in center field, and he's below average at shortstop. So, playing the position and playing it well are 2 different things. I think he's a very good player, but I don't think Ceddanne Rafaela would be even top 3 for me in the AL Rookie of the Year this year, even though I think he's had a nice year.
Yeah, there's a little bit of what if there. Like, what if he'd just been center field all year, and you're putting, on top of this package, you're putting elite center field defense, then I think it'd be a little bit closer. But he still wouldn't launch in the top for me, because the fact of the matter is that his batting average of 250 masks the fact that his OBP and slugging are bad, and he's basically 20% worse than league average with a stick. So, if there was a defensive winner of the year, like, I think you could put him in the mix for center field, not for short. Make sure that you make that distinction. But now we're making another award, Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Stop.
I have a lot of stock in trophy companies.
I did have a question. I don't think this ended up in the story with Rustin Dodd, but he asked me like what the actual spread is, and Baseball Prospectus has some way of kind of referencing the spread, but I kind of think that in one way of looking at the spread, the plus minus on WAR and how precise it is that you can look at the spread between the different sites, because that gives you an idea of like, these all are WAR frameworks and they've come to different conclusions. So Rafaela, a spread of it's a spread of plus or minus 3. I mean, plus or minus 1.5. When we did have Meg Rowley and Sean Foreman saying a half win wasn't almost enough to be definitive. So I'm guessing that the difference is plus or minus 3/4 of a win. That's a lot, dude. So you're saying that basically you have to see a guy be ahead by a full win before you can be like, okay, WAR says this guy's better.
Right. So you have to have something or a series of somethings that break these ties. And when you have loaded classes, you have multiple ties. It's not just choosing between 2. It's choosing between 3 or 4 or 5 in some cases, depending on how far down you go. I mean, I think Mason Wynn in the NL's had a very good rookie year, and he's just a little bit overshadowed by the top end performances. Like in a typical year, Mason Wynn would be right there in that conversation. In a typical year, Tyler Fitzgerald might be a bigger part of the conversation than he's been. A little older than most rookies, but having a great year nonetheless. And he's going to probably be 5th or 6th on most lists.
Yeah, I wonder if this is the new norm. Like, as the league gets younger, is the Rookie of the Year going to get harder and harder to decide, right? Versus years where, even last year, Gunnar Henderson was unanimous. Was the NL side unanimous? It feels like in some years there's like a no doubter, and then in other years we have things like this where it's like, man, we've got like 5 guys who you could make the case who could win this in each league. And I wonder if that's going to become more of the norm versus the years where it's just like, Gunnar Henderson's
Carroll was unanimous.
Yeah, they were both unanimous. Okay, I thought they were both unanimous. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to get that in either league this year. Do you guys? I don't think we're going to have a unanimous pick.
I think you're right also to point out long-term trends here. That's interesting. I think, the league is getting younger. And there's more, the rules are putting more pressure on athleticism and being younger. We had Joey Votto just talking about this in his retirement. So this might be more normal, and it might put us on the track to having more awards.
See?
Yeah.
And it's good because you can have more of the performance incentives for players and for teams for continuing to bring players up when they're ready, right? I think everyone wants their team to have a shot at a few extra draft picks. Hitter and pitcher awards separately would be another path to possibly do that. So it is a really good point. And I'm looking back at the recent winners, of course, last year, Gunnar and Carroll for AL, NL, Julio and Michael Harris 2 years ago, Randy Arozarena, Jonathan India in 2021. 2020 was weird. That was Kyle Lewis and Devin Williams. But then 2019, Yordan Alvarez and Pete Alonso. 2018, Ohtani and Acuna. 2017, Judge and Bellinger. I mean, like, those are all great players that won those awards, other than the shortened season. And even that, Kyle Lewis has had a lot of injuries. Devin Williams is a reliever. So it's like, what are you going to do? But generally, I think this has become a more difficult award to win. I think that's a really good call, Britt. Thanks a lot for that question, by the way. I would die for you. Hope you're enjoying Yu Darvish looking pretty good on Monday night against the Astros. So one of the odd stories of the week came from Andrew Baggerly, covers the Giants for The Athletic. And it's about Buster Posey's role in Matt Chapman's extension with the Giants. And the question I had for you, Britt, when we were getting ready for this show was, how often do the advisors or people who are on the board of directors, former players that have the ear of ownership, how often do they or ownership directly actually go around their own front office to get deals done? This was a big contract extension for Matt Chapman, but Farhan had been working on it. And as Bags reported, among the differences, a no trade clause was something that they were able to hammer out going around Scott Boras and Farhan Zaidi. So this doesn't look good for Farhan. We'll get to that in just a second. But are most organizations structured in a way where at the top end of a free agent pool or at the top end of an extension, ownership is heavily involved, if not even driving negotiations completely around the front office? Or is this highly unusual?
So there are definitely, for bigger deals, contracts that I know for a fact GMs had nothing to do with. That was, let's say, Scott Boras and ownership. That's actually not unusual. What is unusual is that Farhan was working on this and that they circumvented him. I have, and I don't want to specifically name names, but there have been, I can name 4 or 5 in my head, instances where a signing happened, and we'll go with one that's very obvious that's been reported, Chris Davis. Dan Duquette had nothing to do with that. That was a Peter Angelos wanted Chris Davis. That was a deal that was bad from the start. But that was a case.
There were a lot of rumors about Pujols and Moreno too.
Yeah,
that was one too.
He's a good one too. So there are definitely cases where Scott Boras and other agents will say, I'm not dealing with the GM or the president. I'm going to the top of the top because this guy's going to have to sign off anyway. Now, these aren't on $1 million deals. These aren't on $5 million deals. These are usually
I think that's a key part.
Bigger deals.
Ownership has to approve, like, if it's over 100 or
big
200
deals.
Yeah.
There's got to be a certain threshold, and it probably varies from organization to organization, where the GM or the president of baseball operations can operate however they want up to a certain point, and then beyond that, there's a permission check. Like, hey, you got to come get sign off. You want to go more than 3 years with a free agent in this organization? We have to sign off on that.
Yeah, Tampa might be more than 50 million, more than 3 years.
Yeah.
I wonder if they had to call ownership on Zach Eflin.
I mean, they were in on Aaron Judge, though, so I'm sure that was something that, like, an example of, like, if Stu Sternberg wanted nothing to do with Aaron Judge, there's no way they would have been in on Aaron Judge.
Right.
Even if Eric Neander loved the guy since he was 10 or something. Like, that just wouldn't have happened. Ownership has to be involved in some of these bigger deals. What was really interesting to me about this was Buster Posey doesn't own the team. So it's not. That was interesting. And like I said,
owner, like part of the ownership group, but he's not the owner. There's usually one person that's sort of thought of as the owner.
This is akin to Cal Ripken Jr. making a mega deal for the Orioles, right? He's part of the ownership group. Yes, he's part of the ownership group, and he's certainly a name, but he's not involved in the day-to-day owning of the team. Buster Posey isn't involved in the day-to-day owning of the team. Now, this, to me, signals that Buster Posey has the power and the influence, which we had kind of heard rumored for a while that he had a lot of power and influence over the last couple of years. This is like the mega warning sign now that Buster Posey is running things. And 2, going around Farhan and Boras just shows again the kind of power that Buster Posey has in this organization. No one ever knows what Giants ownership is thinking, right? No one ever knows their plans. They are like one of the more elusive ownership groups. And they finally have sort of tipped their hand in that Buster Posey is the key to unlocking what the Giants want. If the Giants make a change from Farhan, we know Buster Posey's going to be involved. We know it's not going to be someone that Buster Posey doesn't like. This signals like immense power to me. And you're kind of seeing this. This was a power play.
But isn't it a little bit dangerous for the Giants and for everybody involved? Because what's the end game for Buster Posey? Like, he's not going to become the GM. Like, there's no precedent for a former player that's part of the ownership group to become the GM.
He doesn't need to be the GM. He's higher than the GM.
Well, okay.
He has more power than the GM.
Right. He can hire and fire the GM of his choice who will do things the way he wants.
What next GM wants to take over?
Well, that's the thing. It's going to be someone who sees the game the way Buster Posey does, or someone who wants to be on the same page as him, right? So
but we'll also know that they don't have final. Like, if we'll also know that the last GM just got the end around.
But timing is everything. Farhan was there before Buster retired. Buster retired at the end of 2022, and then got that minority ownership stake that included the seat on the board. So this is the kind of thing that happens while you're in that GM or president of baseball operation situation that just completely changes your outlook and your power.
So you're saying the timing of the new hire, if there is a new hire, the new person will know what they're getting into.
Right.
And whereas they'll just be like, I'm a de facto number 2, really. Because Buster will be there.
Yep.
Yes.
Whereas Farhan was like, I was number 1 and now I'm not.
Well, I mean, unless there was somebody else that previously had a Buster-like influence over things, but I don't get that impression.
About them, yeah.
Yeah, they did, but we don't know about it.
All these jobs come with warts too, these GM jobs. I mean, we spoke this winter about how nobody wanted the Red Sox job, right? Because it's like, well, that seems like a lose-lose job. Well, how about working for Artie Moreno? That doesn't seem like a super fun time either. What about, Chicago, Jerry Reinsdorf? They said Bob Nightingale reported they're going to cut payroll. So, I mean, that seems like a fun job. Not. I mean, there's just all these really, every job has warts, and so few jobs, maybe 3 or 4, if they opened, would be like, wow, this is a good job. But jobs usually open because somebody has underperformed and put their organization in a bad spot. You don't just slot. James Click was like an unusual thing, right? Because it was like he slotted into a World Series, contending team right away. That almost never happens. So all of these jobs now come with warts. So if Farhan were to be on,
and there were some surprising warts in that situation that we just didn't know about yet that have come to light since.
That's another situation where I think there are people that don't have a defined role in the organization who carry a lot of power with Jim Crane. So I think this isn't as unusual as we think, but it signals a lot of things that I think people were kind of wondering, like, is Farhan calling the shots? Who does ownership trust? Like, it answers a lot of those questions. And Andrew Baggerly, this is a fantastic piece of reporting because, as you guys know, you don't go with this unless you have it dead to rights. You have to make sure that you're right, and you have to go to Buster, and you have to go to Farhan, you have to go to all these people to make sure that it's accurate and it's nuanced. And it was just a terrific piece of reporting that kind of finally, like I said, gives us some insight into what the Giants have going on, because people thought the Chapman deal meant Farhan was going to stick around for a while. Well, turns out Farhan had nothing to do with that. So now is Farhan again on thin ice because he had nothing to do with that, and the team has not been successful, and they have underperformed, right? It just opens up a whole new bag of questions in my mind.
Yeah, and there was some interesting sort of follow-up reporting where, there was a lot of discussion now about the contract status, and, Farhan is dancing around it, saying that there's language in his contract that keeps him with the team till 2026, but it's not fully guaranteed. So that means he's not really under contract. It's an option, I think, waiting to be picked up. It's not been picked up yet. And if those options get picked up right around now. It's like it's November. It's like we just finally heard Chris Young, got extended.
Yeah. And promoted.
Oh, really? He's not POBO now?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you got these. This is what's going to be happening during the playoffs, and so. I don't know. It's not fair to put it in these terms, but if I were a betting man, I don't think I'd bet on Farhan right now to be with the team next year. It's just
next year.
Yeah,
2025. I thought you said 2026 was not guaranteed. 2025.
He said through 2026, which that I don't even know what that means. Does that mean to 2026?
So. When they hired Bob Melvin, didn't they want?
And if there are options, it doesn't matter. If there's a 2025 option and 2026 option, and they're just options, and it's just language that's not guaranteed, that doesn't mean anything. That means he's basically not under contract.
Gotcha. Okay. So there is a
That's
chance
my
in your
understanding,
book.
reading between the
Okay.
lines.
Okay. And Bob Melvin has one more year, right?
That's what he's still dancing around. He said there's language that keeps them both with the organization.
Okay.
So it may not be. I don't know. I mean, it would seem kind of crazy to do what they did to get Melvin from San Diego and then just pull the plug after 1 year. But this whole situation with the Chapman extension is a little crazy.
It is. And keep in mind, San Diego wanted Bob Melvin out because him and AJ Preller didn't get along. So it wasn't like they pried him away so much as San Diego wasn't going to fire him.
Wanted
It was a graceful way for the two parties to part.
And I think that Farhan and Melvin are in line with each other.
Yeah.
But that may not be a good news for either of them.
Came up earlier. The White Sox are going to cut payroll in 2025. I feel like if they just didn't say it, no one would care. You'd expect it. They're horrible. They're rebuilding. Every rebuilding team tears it down. Like big team, small team, like they spend less when they're bad. Like that's a normal thing. But to come out and say it in the midst of a historically terrible season,
they're talking a lot right now.
You just bring negativity upon yourself, right? I heard that story. I'm like, yes, I don't expect them to spend money. What free agent would want to go play there right now?
Also, and negativity is like so rampant on the teams that are not winning right now at the end of the season. Locally, everybody's calling for Farhan's job.
I mean, one more sidebar on the White Sox. If they hadn't said a word, Derek, I agree. They've got money coming off the books. The payroll's going down anyway. This isn't like a let's slash and dash kind of situation. They have some money coming off the books. The payroll could naturally go down. What was the purpose of saying that? Recently when Chris Getz was like, well, I thought we were going to lose 100 games, but 110, 120. What was the point of saying that either?
Say that, dude. Like you can think it. You can have that in conversation internally, but don't say it in front of the media. Come on.
I think even the most ardent, like every team should try fan could look at the White Sox next year and be like, maybe it's not the time to sign, the best free, like Juan Soto to the White Sox for like $700 million. Maybe not the time. I don't know if it lines up with what's going on there right now.
I don't think they can pay him enough. Yeah, I don't think Juan Soto could take enough money for that. Like, no. He wants records, but you know what I mean. I think
records are good, but that's you're probably signing on for maybe like 2 or 3 winning seasons in the next 10 if you go there. So that's not great.
No.
Let's talk about the Orioles for a little bit. It's been a minute. We're starting to get some questions in our Discord about them. They're 84-66 entering play on Tuesday, 3 games behind the Yankees in the AL East, and they just lost the series over the weekend to the Tigers, who are doing everything in their power to get that last wild card in the AL. And the questions about the Orioles kind of go back to the start of the second half. So if we just look at July 1st forward, right, they're 3 below 500, 31-34 during that span. They have a negative run differential. I think run prevention is the bigger issue than scoring runs, but there are some individuals
I disagree.
have not been themselves. It's a little bit of both, but I think the question we got that started this was from Orioles 2014 in our Discord, and it's Adley Rutschman, a guy that just looks completely lost right now. And Adley Rutschman got hit by a pitch in late June, and whether he has admitted it or not, it seems like he's been hurt since then. Like, it's pretty easy to see. And you broke this out just by like bat speed, barrel rate.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Dino.
The results also point to this, but like is this kind of in line with someone who's physically not feeling right, or is this in line with just the normal ebbs and flows of a season?
He's also a catcher, right? So I think that's important to know, even if he wasn't getting
wearing down.
Yeah, they just get obliterated over the course of the season.
Yeah, it could be wearing down, but these are pretty stark splits, because you have his bat speed down 3/4 of a mile per hour, and that's meaningful because he already had some of the worst bat speed on the team. Barrel rate down from 8.4% to 2.7%. That's bad, because 8.4 is pretty good and 2.7 is really bad. And then hard hit 43% down to 26%.
Yeah.
You know, that's huge. Every time you put the ball in play over 95 miles an hour, your OPS on that pitch goes up like, 200 points or something. So that's really bad. And then he just hasn't even hit the ball, a single ball, as hard as he did before the injury. 109.3 max EV before, 107.2 after. So just everything that you would say, is he injured? I would say, yes, look at that. He's injured. But, what can you do at this point? I mean, he's your catcher. He's really good at the sort of catchery stuff, so you just, like there are other teams out there, like, they have Martin Maldonado or Victor Caratini, like they have these guys that are just good at catching. Just that's what he has to be for you. So everybody else has to step up.
And that's the problem.
Step up.
Yeah.
If the rest of a couple of days off isn't enough to get you back to your pre-injury form, I mean, Adley had a 136 WRC plus the day he got hit by this pitch. He's got a 66 since then. That's a massive difference. He's been as bad as he was good around this injury.
And this is why I think that it's the offense that I'm pointing a little bit more fingers at, because I have last 30 days. They're 22nd in baseball the last 30 days with a 207 average, 289 OBP, and a 358 slugging.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the same offense we saw early in the year. And what's weird is that there are players that are doing okay. I mean, Cedric Mullins has kind of turned his season around and been valuable. Gunnar Henderson has been a metronome all year. Anthony Santander has been great all year.
Yeah.
And Kowser's actually come back out of his slump and been at least league average. But you just have Adley Rutschman. Jackson Holliday has been one of the worst players in the big leagues.
Yeah. So much so that people are wondering, is he going to make the playoff roster?
I think if Westberg is swinging right now, if Westberg can show anything, he might just take that slot. Ryan O'Hearn has really fallen off. The Eloy Jimenez acquisition has not worked for them.
No.
And so, they've run through some of their other rookies like Mayo. And I mean, they're looking for a spark. You could still see kind of Westberg, maybe coming back and being and extending that lineup, and Kowser continuing this sort of march towards where he used to be. And then Rutschman just being, the sixth best hitter on this team. That team could still do well in the playoffs. It's just right now, it's a buck short.
Yeah. You got to get everyone else going. And trading Connor Norby to Miami looks bad.
I mean, he could have been another guy that they could have run through in the Holiday Mayo, in that sort of, merry-go-round that they've done. And Norby might have been the one that hit for them.
Yeah. And I think if you're an Orioles fan, you've watched and you're worried because this isn't like we've seen other playoff teams. Certainly we've talked about this. Every team has had like a 2-week stretch where you're like, God, this team is pitiful. The Orioles, though, have been right under, if not slightly below 500 since July. So this is not like a bad couple week stretch that every team goes through. This is like the team has been underperforming for quite a while. And I think that bothers people. And keep in mind, guys, last year, their bats disappeared and their pitching didn't hold up and they were swept out of that first round by Texas. And they right now lately look like that team again. I mean, the Tigers had was it a perfect game going against them, in one of these games? Like, every time, I live in this area, so they're on a lot. Every time you turn the TV on, they're down 3-0, it feels like, right? The offense just hasn't been able to click. They couldn't even sweep the White Sox. Most of these good teams now are taking those free wins. They take 2 out of 3, not enough against a team that probably is going to go down as the worst team in Major League history unless they go win 7 of their last 11 games. So I think there is concern. The pitching feels thin, as I do agree that it's more on the offense, but Derek had a good point. Like the pitching has not been great either. And they were supposed to make big moves at the deadline, or at least make upgrades. And I don't think for the second trade deadline in a row, I don't think that they did enough. I don't think they were aggressive enough. And last year, you could write it off as we're at the beginning of our window. These guys are all young. We don't want to part with them. Well, you're here now. You're in the thick of what we expect to be a contending window. You're not going to keep all of these guys forever. You're not going to afford to keep all these guys forever. At what point and what year do you push those chips in? This seems like one of the years where you should have been a little bit more aggressive, even though I know it's a tough market and there weren't a lot of sellers. It's not going away. That trend is not going away with a third wild card. It's going to be tough to upgrade. I think they should have been a little more aggressive in getting the higher end relievers, the Tanner Scotts of the world.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a good spot to make the push. I mean, Trevor Rogers
is a 5 ERA with him right now.
Trevor Rogers' warts were pretty clear. I think initially I had a tendency to give the Orioles the benefit of the doubt because they are a smart organization that may have seen something they could fix. If they did, it's going to take more time to fix it, or they were just wrong. Both of those things are entirely possible. I think what's interesting about the way this team is right now is like, if Adley's been playing hurt, we grade them differently than if Adley's on the IL the entire time. They've been missing Westberg in a big way. That's a pretty important absence. They've been missing Grayson Rodriguez on the IL. So they've had some important players either playing hurt or not playing at all. And then I think on the pitching side, I'm still surprised. Corbin Burns is not the guy that I've seen for a long time. He's just not that guy right now. Second half ERA is over 4. 7.5 Ks per 9. Like, that's not the Corbin Burns you expected when you traded for him. So you're not getting that dominant performance from him. Grayson Rodriguez hasn't been there. If they hadn't traded for Eflin, they'd be in really bad shape. Eflin's actually been pretty good since the trade. So that was actually a good move, I think, at the deadline.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit like the situation we've seen at times this year with the Dodgers, more concentrated with injuries on the pitching side for them right now. But can they, in these last couple of weeks, get the roster healthy enough to recoup some of their momentum? Even if they don't win the division, if they get into postseason, can they at least be healthy enough to do the damage we thought they could do earlier in the year? A lot of it, I think, comes down to some key injuries really kind of pulling threads on this roster a little bit and causing this stretch to go more than a month. It's looking like a slightly underwhelming half season, but they were so good in the first half. They built up that cushion. They can weather this. It's just a question of health, I think, for me.
I wonder how these trade deadlines come together. I would just love to be a fly in the room, because
I know.
What if you are the Orioles and you say, okay, we've got Norby and Stowers, and this is our package, and you're shopping Norby and Stowers, and that's what you go to the Blue Jays and you say, we'd love to have Kikuchi, Norby and Stowers. You go to the Tigers, we'd love to have Flaherty, Norby and Stowers, and you just don't, like, you set some sort of, maybe they set a hard line and they're like, we're not going to add to that, and they shopped it around, and Trevor Rogers is the best they could get. But what if they just added somebody, Armbrister, one of their top arms, right? To, in line with like Jake Bloss. Okay, so Jake Bloss, I think Armbrister maybe a little bit better, but around the same. Connor Norby, better than Loperfido, I think, and then Stowers. So then you start to like, so were they just not willing to add, and they just had like certain packages and that was it? And they made the deals they could make? Or did they look around and say, oh no, Trevor Rogers is sneaky. We got to get like, if we just have him throw his change up more, it'll be so much better.
I hope not, because that was what they did last year and it tanked. They tried Flaherty, who ended up, I think, being hurt, and they got Shintaro Fujinami, who was another reclamation.
And that's a little bit too smart by half too. Like,
roster.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. I know his stuff plus was through the roof, and they seem to kind of like the stuff plus was through the roof on Fujinami, but he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. So they have Sarah Anthony Dominguez. They're like, oh, his stuff plus is really good. His command isn't. Let's bring him over and have him do what he does here. Well, the walk rate has been great with the Orioles, but that's about the only thing, because he has 4 homers per 9 with the Orioles. So I don't know if there's something like sort of missing in that, like, oh, we'll take him and make him better. So almost every, I think I can almost say like every starter that was traded at the deadline is pitching significantly differently with their new team. A
lot of them better. A lot of them better.
Yeah. But so I think that these teams have this sort of siren song of like, we can make him better.
Yeah.
And, Rogers is the one where he pitched significantly different with his new team, and it was not any better.
Well, and it's not what Orioles fans want to hear right now, but I think maybe part of the reason they were willing to give up what they gave up to get Rogers is that he wasn't a rental, right? They have him for 2 more seasons. So if it doesn't pay off right away, but it pays off in a future season, it's still better than nothing.
And that's the difference between trading those guys. Maybe they wanted Rogers over Kikuchi and Flaherty because he'd be there next year.
Maybe. I mean, Orba was their third or fourth option. It's all they could get. Like timing and preferences of other teams. Like maybe the Jays really love Jake Bloss more than what the Orioles were offering.
And that's the part that's why I would love to be in the room, because it's like what part of it is like the evaluation of other players, the evaluation of their own players, the evaluation of what they could do with the players coming in, you know.
Yeah, that in the draft room, I've always wanted to just be like a fly on the wall. Like, I won't write anything. I'll never speak of this, but I would love to know what happens in those draft rooms. I will say this, though. Derek mentioned the injuries. Kyle Bradish, a guy people kind of forgot about, would have been huge had he not been hurt. John Means also, hasn't been able to pitch.
And even
as well.
if you bring Rodriguez back and you bring Westberg back and they are healthy, just putting them back on this team changes the landscape a little bit. Because then I think you go in, you're saying, oh, you're going Rodriguez, you're going Burns, Rodriguez, Eflin, and you've got Kramer in long relief. Like, that's a pretty good playoff rotation.
And Albert Suarez, who's been a big deal for them and kind of filling the hole, is another swing manish guy you can put in the bullpen. So
and then you're just hoping that Sir Anthony Dominguez holds it together for a couple of weeks. And Cano is his like great setup man, and you can kind of see a World Series winning staff. We just said that, like, in the past years that last year was the 8th best rotation against the 15th best rotation. Like you can win with that sort of deal, but it takes more batting than they had. So that's why I keep coming back to batting. I do think that Gunnar is an all level talent, like MVP type talent, and I do believe in Cowser. And I really like Westberg, and so I do think they'll come back together again. But it's been a long stretch.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the key, though. Getting Grayson Rodriguez and Jordan Westberg healthy will go a long way towards helping fix a few of the flaws that the Orioles have been kind of fighting against here throughout the last 2.5 months. The question that applies to the Orioles, that applies to a few other contending teams right now, is does the form of your rotation late in the year, does it matter? Does it matter more than your numbers in May or June, or is it just another data point that we maybe put too much stock into because of recency bias? I mean, I know if your rotation's ripped up by injuries at the end of the year, that matters because then you're relying on some completely different arms than you expected to. But if those guys are just not pitching as well as you thought in the final month, does that actually matter? Does that have any sort of carryover effect into the postseason,
I mean, I haven't found it when I try to do correlations between September wins above replacement, September record, and what they did in the playoffs. So I point more towards chaos. But I do, when I look at the playoff field and I see that in the past month, what you've got is Milwaukee with the 16th best rotation, Minnesota with the 17th best rotation, Detroit with the 18th, Cleveland with the 19th, and the Dodgers with the 25th, and the Diamondbacks with the 28th. I mean, even with my like sort of World Series cribbing, you have to go all the way back to 2015 to have a rotation that was as bad as 20th get into the World Series. So it makes me wonder, are any of those teams World Series teams? And I guess the flip side, the reason why these don't correlate so well is that we have unexpected things happen in the playoffs all the time. And you'll find a Brandon Pfaadt who during the regular season wasn't any good and then just goes through and adds a sinker late in the season. And I've even seen Corbin Burns he's like working a sweeper back in, which he hasn't been using all year. And I think it's a little bit just to get enough comfortable with it. So in the playoffs, you can be like, oh, sweeper, that's not on your scouting report, or like you didn't think about that. So there are like these adjustments that are happening right now that could, and then also what we've been talking about is the sort of the winnowing, the sort of tightening of these rosters. If you look at Cleveland in the playoffs, it's going to be Tanner Bybee, Gavin Williams, and Alex Cobb probably starting games for them. And it doesn't matter so much that I'm not sure Ben Lively is a good option for them, in the playoffs. And, Minnesota will benefit from tightening. Milwaukee, I think, will benefit from tightening. So, even in LA where you're like, oh, it's impossible. LA's got nothing going for them. Well, Yamamoto's pitching well again. Flaherty's pitching well again. And Kershaw's going to start game 3. And if he goes 2 innings, then they do bullpen for the rest, and their bullpen's pretty good. So it's like, it could actually be okay.
Yeah, they could find a way to get around it with the Dodgers. But I mean, what do you think, Britt? I think the other part of what Eno was saying that probably needs to be mentioned too is with the expanded field playoffs. I think we're going to start to see teams that are in that 15 to 20 range among rotations have more postseason success because more of them are going to be in the postseason. Like we're going to have occasional runs from those groups.
The shortening of the staff to me is what is key here, which is why you can't really go by, the 20th best. You need 6 good pitchers in the playoffs. You need 2, maybe 3 starters, 2, maybe 3 relievers. I saw the Nationals win the World Series off like 5 arms. You don't need,
and it's not just the Nationals. I mean, just last year, the Texas and Arizona were down to 6 or 7 pitchers they trusted. So,
and the thing about the playoffs is with the off days and the way these schedules work out, you can put starters in the bullpen. So if your bullpen is bad, remember the Rangers last year, how are they going to cover for this bullpen that nobody can trust? There are ways around that, which is why, as you have said many times before, you just can't sit and predict the playoffs because some of these stats are so different. Guys are being used in different roles. Guys who, in September, you might be like, let's just get this guy in there for mop-up duty. Let's have this guy just wear it another third time through the lineup. We already, we're at 5, Atlanta, great example. We're 1 million games up in the division in previous years, like pitching different guys, getting different guys extra rest. September is such an outlier. There's a reason why that old adage in baseball is like, don't trust September or spring training. That I don't think you can look at it and say, unless, like you said, DVR, your whole rotation is, unless guys are dropping like flies and you have actual injuries, then you have a problem in October. But I think so much of this, like guys flip the switch from September to the playoffs. It's a totally different game. If you talk to managers, it's managed totally different. It's just, it is not the same. So yeah, if your rotation isn't doing well, like let's take Seth Lugo last night, has the worst start he's had as a Royal. Does anybody think that's the Seth Lugo that's going to show up in the playoffs? Like the guy's been really good all year. It's a totally different vibe than pitching, against Detroit when you're going to go to the playoffs. Like to me, you can't look at it as, this staff is 20th right now. This staff is 18th right now. Well, how about what are their top pitchers? What is the best of the best? You're skimming off the top here, and you don't have to pitch anybody else that's down low unless you're in a blowout playoff game. So you can get by with just your stars, which is why it's so hard to project the playoffs because it's a totally different brand of baseball than we've been exposed to for the last 6 months. So I don't think it matters at all. I don't. I also think teams get hot, like the Rangers and the Diamondbacks out of that wild card round, and all of a sudden these guys who you were kind of worried about, as you go through the cyclical parts of the season, they're having this incredible 2 weeks. That's all you need.
Yeah.
To all of a sudden,
But what sucks is, we as media, and even on this pod, and we're going to try to have playoff previews, and we're going to go on radio stations where, they ask us, who do you have in World Series? And, we're going to write pieces on The Athletic that are, what do we like going into the playoffs? So you do have to, at some point, just like, be like, I've got to be worried about something, like I've got to say something first of all, and then I've got to be worried about it. So there's got to be some rotation you're worried about, like even getting 6 guys together. And I think when I look at it, it's kind of Arizona for me, because I'm trying to be like, okay, 6 guys, we just need to have 6 guys. And I'm not sure that I trust more than 3 guys on that staff. I'm looking at this right now, and I like Zach Gallen. I like Justin Martinez, but he has some blow up potential. I like AJ Puck.
That's it. 3? You like 3 pitchers in this roster?
I mean, Brandon Pfaadt's okay, but he always struggles against lefties, and he's in the middle of a 10 ERA in the last 30 days. Ryan Nelson has 1 pitch. He's a fastball, and that's about it. Eduardo Rodriguez I never really liked. Merrill Kelly, he's coming off injury. I don't know if I trust him. If I knew he was normal Merrill Kelly, then I'd put him on my safe players list. Kevin Ginkel is pretty wild, and Ryan Thompson, like I could maybe give them 4 relievers, but I have trouble giving them 3 starters. I'm not sure who I pick as my 3 starters. I guess I would pick Gallen, Kelly, and Nelson, or Gallen, Kelly, and Pfaadt. But I think that every game would be a bullpen game for me if I was the Arizona manager.
Well, let me pretend that I work for an Arizona sports talk radio channel and ask you if it means anything to you that the Arizona Diamondbacks continue to lead Major League Baseball in runs scored by
Oh my
a
God.
healthy margin. Can they
Yeah,
hit
no.
their pitching, right? You have concerns about the pitching. We've seen that here in Arizona. We've seen this team underperform at times with that rotation, have some bullpen issues.
They're winning games 11-10.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
That is
can.
harder in the playoffs to do, though, because teams use their best pitchers because you're not getting.
Mm.
So that is the reason why offense often slumps, except in these lopsided games, because you are getting the best of the best, and you're no longer getting like guys who pitch in 8-run games, type of thing. But I don't know. This is why we shouldn't even predict anything, because you can be smart and you can have all the knowledge in the world and you're still going to be wrong. It's like when you do the brackets for the college basketball and you like look through it and, I don't know about you guys, but I try to like make educated guesses and look at who could be the upsets. And then whoever ends up winning is some like chick who doesn't even know what basketball is, who just filled it out based on mascots they like,
there is always that one.
There's always that one person that's like, oh, I forgot I was even in the pool. And you're like, oh, okay, you're winning.
Taco from the league. It's always a person who's just not as into what's happening that wins those pools, it seems like.
Yeah. And the playoffs are the same thing. It is just because it is a different game. It is a small sample size. And baseball is such a game that the ball bounced and hit the foul line at the catwalk at Tropicana Field. And now it's just crazy stuff. It changes the whole series.
Yeah. Over the last 30 days in terms of team stats and batting, I think what you've got is still Arizona. Arizona's at the top all the time. But the Dodgers, as they've gotten healthy, have become, the top 3, top 4 offense that they should be, I think, when they're fully healthy. So I just feel like if I'm playing let me set my rotation for the playoffs, and I also have a really good offense, I actually think I prefer the Dodgers pitching staff, because I can go Flaherty, Yamamoto, and Walker Buehler plus et al. For the first 3 games. And I really like Kopech. Trainin looks pretty good. Evan Phillips is still decent. So I can get to 6 where I feel a little bit better, I think.
Yeah.
I still wonder with Walker Buehler if it's going to be even 80%.
That's a bullpen-ish game. That's get us through 2 innings, please.
So you're basically saying one of Kershaw or Buehler will be good enough to be that 6th guy as the 3rd starter.
Yeah.
That's how you're looking at them.
Yeah.
The problem
it's not
is
absurd
every
at all.
team. No, every team could. The Dodgers could win the World Series, like Ken Rosenthal wrote today on The Athletic, or they get swept in the first round, like every single team. We're going to make that case next week, aren't we?
Yeah.
Every single team. So if you're curious,
of our preview there. Yeah.
You want to get a little high and a little low on your team, that's it, man.
Tune in next week.
I think we're deciding if we're just going to bury everyone or if we're going to give you reasons to be hopeful. But as they say, it's the hope that kills you. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. $2 a month gets you in the door. You can find Eno at Saris, find Britt at Britt_Giroli, find me at Derek Riper. Thanks to our Discord users for dropping a few questions for us in this episode. Always appreciate that. You can join the Discord using the link in the show description. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you at 1 o'clock Eastern on Thursday on YouTube.
Thanks for listening.